An asteroid was seen in space a long time ago, flying through the solar system, and was really not from our galaxy. Astronomers used telescopes and found out that the meteorite was moving at an incredibly high speed. People did not know what civilizations the meteorite hid inside and what dangers could be hidden. Then, each country received a short radio signal, which was considered a message from aliens. People tried to decide what to do with the meteorite or respond to the signal, but it was too late. After some time, the celestial body passed through the atmosphere and approached the Earth. There was an apocalypse on Earth, and life on the entire planet changed. To survive, it was necessary to defend yourself, look for resources, and fight. It was 2118. Each time, the main character recorded the latest events on a dictaphone because he didn't know if he would be able to wake up the next day. He wasn't sure that anyone would ever be able to listen to his recordings, but that's how he felt alive. Sometimes, the hero couldn't believe that monsters, cataclysms, and everything that happened were real. It seemed that he would wake up from sleep and realize that it was all a nightmare, and he would be the same boy from his childhood. Dongsheng was professionally engaged in parkour and also participated in competitions. Everyone liked his performance so much that he had every chance of winning. The guy had a lot of fans, and they believed that he would be the one to win. And in the end, he did it. Dongsheng became the winner of the biggest parkour tournament. Everyone was delighted with his victory, and he received the cup of the best athlete. His broadcast was watched by a lot of people. Because of this, he became a real legend. Dongsheng was able to glorify his country at the trials. But his parents did not support such an occupation. Soon, it was necessary to return, and their plane had already arrived. After some time, boarding the plane began. The guys found themselves in the cabin and tried to find their seats. The stewardess tried to arrange the luggage, but the bags were too heavy. She couldn't do anything. Dongsheng noticed that she was having a hard time. He approached her and decided to help her unpack the heavy irons. But suddenly, the suitcase started to fall, and he managed to catch it at the last moment. Dongsheng found himself in a difficult position because he had to hold it with one hand. Still, she fell and hit him on the head, and Dongsheng kissed her. The guy hit her on the nose painfully. She was in pain, but she tried to pretend that everything was fine. The bag belonged to the man, so Dongsheng put it back in its place and apologized for what happened. Dongsheng couldn't change his mind about what had happened and about the girl he had managed to kiss. Also on the plane was Professor Hill, who was flying to another country on business. He was working on an achievement that, in his opinion, would change the entire planet and the lives of thousands of people. In 3 hours, he had to be at the hotel and prepare everything for the transfer of documents. In addition, there were a lot of strange people in the cabin. They looked scary, since the time when a strange meteorite appeared and people received a notification from aliens. The government gave everyone the right to vote and make a choice whether to send a message in response. A lot of people did not take this seriously. They wanted to look at the aliens and therefore were in favor of responding. A stewardess appeared and announced that takeoff was about to begin and it was necessary to fasten their seatbelts. A woman sitting next to the professor overheard him talking about a new invention. She wondered if he had made his choice and wanted to meet the aliens. The professor tried to explain that it was necessary to find alternative ways to generate energy. However, he thought that the aliens might have technologies that would allow them to get the maximum amount of energy. The plane continued to fly and was quite high in the air. The bandits who were inside and had planned everything were ready to carry out the operation. The suspicious men got up and headed towards the cockpit. They had been preparing for this for a long time, so they even had a knife. When everything was ready, they began to open the cockpit in order to get inside and seize the plane. After a while, they were able to be inside. They knocked out the pilots, and the stewardess who was inside was taken prisoner and threatened with a knife. Suddenly, other girls came inside and witnessed what was happening. Therefore, so that they would not interfere with the bandits, the bald man also knocked them out with one strong blow to the neck. When everything was ready, and the entire plane crew was taken prisoner, they were preparing to convey the announcement to the staff. Everyone had to stay in their seats and not move. If anyone tried to resist, they would die immediately. The plane had already changed its course, but the bandits promised to let everyone go after they reached their destination. The main character tried to do something, but he saw a man who was trying to resist the bandits. He was the owner of this plane and tried to kick them out and change the plane's course again. A hefty security guard stood in his way who hit him and threw him to the other side of the cabin. The security guard got angry with him for such courage and confidence. They forced the stewardess to tell the passengers not to move because at that very moment they were going to hijack the plane. But the bandits knew that there were also people in the cabin who were better not to touch. Among them was a professor, with whom they tried to negotiate and introduce themselves as his security guards. Dongsheng ordered him to flee, but his friend, because of fear, could not get up from his seat and escape. Dongsheng wanted to help his friend, but received a strong blow to the stomach for disobeying his order. Hill tried to stop the bandits and protect the young man they were treating so cruelly. He was joined by concerned passengers who, taking advantage of the moment, tried to push the man away. Meanwhile, the pilot tried to cope with the controls, but he knew that the hardest part was ahead, because right in front of them was a large storm cloud that had to be passed. There was a thunderstorm, and the plane risked not reaching the specified target, but they had no choice and they simply could not turn back. When they began to fly into the storm zone, the plane began to shake and the pilot tried to keep control. He didn't know if they would survive the night and land the plane. Suddenly, he saw a monstrous monster in the clouds that was about to attack the plane. Moreover, there were a lot of monsters, and no one knew what was really happening. Now, he definitely wouldn't be able to stop the plane, and when it started to approach them, the bright light began to blind him. The man couldn't see anything at all, so he just moved into the unknown. The plane started to fall apart, and it seemed like it was the end. The passengers prayed. Everyone was very scared, and no one understood what was happening. They witnessed the plane start to fall apart, and sparks from it flew straight into their windows. It was becoming more and more difficult to control the plane, so the pilot tried to descend. But down below was a new threat, much more terrifying than what they had seen before. It was a terrifying mutant standing on the ground ready to catch and break the plane into pieces. He went right inside it. From the strong impact, its wings broke. The plane itself was on the ground and for some time did not stop. It was completely destroyed, and now it was impossible to restore it. There was heavy smoke and scurrying. A fire started. But inside there were many living people who risked being trapped in a death trap and burned alive. They managed to open the door and get a chance for salvation. One by one, they began to descend to the ground and left all their belongings inside. Many people were injured, but they did not forget about the bandits who were also inside. It was interesting how they were now going to settle in this area where there was nothing but mountains and rocks. Moreover, they considered the men losers because they could not even steal the plane. Meanwhile, the bandits were inside and trying to get out. What happened was very strange, but none of them could explain what really happened. The chief spoke about a demon that had torn his plane apart, but they were lucky to stay alive. The injured tried to call the rescue service, but they had no connection at all. There were so many wounded that they risked simply dying without waiting for help. They screamed in pain, but it was impossible to change anything. Under the plane, they saw a terrible monster that was moving and trying to free itself. However, the bandits could not escape because they had to follow the old professor and pray that he was unharmed. But it seemed the mission was impossible to continue in such a situation. However, the chief believed that they should understand what was happening, and only then they could make some decision. Suddenly, amidst the smoke, they saw people in military uniforms. They had weapons, and it seemed that the people were serious. Seeing them, many people tried to run away. But the soldiers began to threaten them and force them to stand still, forbidding them to move. They ordered everyone to raise their hands and not move, otherwise they would start killing everyone. The soldiers were pleased because they had never managed to find so many prisoners. Now, their leader was definitely pleased. Then, they were going to take people prisoner and started to put them in cars. Among the crowd was a boy who did not want to go without his friend, whom he could not find. For this, he was severely beaten on the head and promised to kill him if he did not obey them. The girl wanted to help him and, despite the threats, began to stop the blood flowing from the wound on his head. But while he was a wonder, you could get gold for him, so the bandits were not going to leave him just like that. They forced him to get up and go to the car, but he did not answer, and there was too little time left, so they left him. Dongsheng lay unconscious the whole time. He was injured, but now he began to come to his senses and opened his eyes. Dongsheng felt a lot of pain. There was a large fragment in his chest, and it was very difficult to even breathe. He could not remember what had happened to him and how he had ended up here. But suddenly he saw the same man who had hit him. Suddenly he saw the same man who had almost killed him. Now he was dead because the fragment had pierced his body. Suddenly he heard a strange sound that caught his attention. What was happening? In front of him was a girl whose head was being eaten by a monster. Now he did not understand anything at all. It seemed like it was just a dream. For the first time in his life, he had experienced something so incredible and terrible. He did not even know that right now, his fate would change forever. Dongsheng tried to shout to her, but it seemed that she was dead. She did not respond and did not show any signs of life. Suddenly, he saw that she started to move her hand, and this meant that she was still alive. It seemed that she was asking him to help, and the guy tried to do it. But when he started to get up, he saw a fragment in his body which caused severe pain and prevented him from moving. The wound was very serious, so he did not know if he could hold out long enough. But if he had no chance of being saved, he should at least save her and become a hero. Therefore, he tried to get the fragment, but he promised that if he survived, he would take revenge on everyone involved in what happened. He gathered his strength and pulled the fragment out of his body. It was so painful that he could not hold back and started screaming loudly. Dongsheng almost lost consciousness. His hands were all covered in blood. Despite the bleeding, he was able to get up and hold the fragment in his hands. At that moment, he approached her and the mutant who was holding her and devouring her face. With a strong blow, he tried to kill him and free the girl. In the end, he succeeded and the monster let her go. It seemed that he was taking her life force and trying to get enough. The girl was clinging to the ground. She was exhausted and showed no signs of life. And the monster he attacked simply disappeared in an unknown direction. The girl did not come to her senses and did not react to his words. However, after a while, she was able to come to her senses and recognize Dongsheng, who became her savior. Now, Dongsheng was preparing to die and believed that he had done the right thing. Suddenly, he felt that the same monster that had begun to attack him had appeared. He painfully grabbed his hand and tried to lift it high into the air. Dongsheng managed to throw up, so he fell to the ground painfully. It seemed that his stomach had burst. It was so painful that he simply could not move. Suddenly, he hit a monster that was about to attack him. It looked like a snake. Now he was in real danger. He had no strength to defend himself. However, he didn't want to just die and lie on the ground next to the freak bandit, and he decided to fight and at any cost defeat and kill the mutant. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound and realized that the man lying next to him was alive. After all, he grabbed his hand and wouldn't let go. Moreover, the criminal was smiling. He was smiling and knew that this was his end. And he wanted to take Dongsheng with him and do everything so that he also died with him. Dongsheng tried to free himself. But it was too late because the monster began to approach him and was about to attack. Suddenly, he attacked him and grabbed the guy right by the face. Dongsheng felt like something had crawled right into his mouth and he couldn't resist it. He felt a lot of pain, and he realized that the monster had started to suck out his life force and wouldn't let go. He had many memories from his entire life. He remembered his father, who comforted him when he cried. His father believed that they could defeat all monsters if they were calm and did not give up. He remembered his own parents' support and how they did not believe in him and his passion. His parents did not support him and did not share his passion because they wanted him to become a doctor. His father was sick and was very worried about his son, who did not want to study and did not listen to him. They believed that Dongsheng was wasting valuable days and did not do anything to become a normal person. And one day, the man could not stand it and hit him. Dongsheng loved them, but left the house because they did not understand him and did not support him. Meanwhile, the bandits began to bring prisoners to their own camp. He was several kilometers from the crash site. There were red flags all around. Their camp was guarded. There were many armed people inside. When they approached, the gate opened. Now they, along with all the prisoners, were inside. The bandits opened a dark container in which many people were sitting. They were forced to get out, and then everyone realized that they were in real hell. People were forced to stand straight and stand in a line in order to look at them in their faces. Weapons were pointed at the people. They were forced to close their mouths and stand silently. The bandits were pleased because this time they managed to get a very large group of prisoners. In addition, there were a lot of women and children there. This excited them a lot, so they were going to rape the women who could not defend themselves. In addition, they beat those who screamed and did not agree to the torture. The leader of the second section, who was beating the women, stopped. The other men could not allow him to kill someone with his own hands because then they would earn much less. This was an order, therefore, all people had to remain intact and their fate would soon be decided. It was necessary to wait for the boss to decide what to do with the people. And while he was away, everyone was ordered to be thrown into prison so that people could wait for his appearance there. Having lined up, the prisoners went to prison. The soldiers accompanied them and forced them to go faster. There were bandits in the crowd, because of whom the disaster happened. They could not accept their fate, so they looked for an opportunity to escape. Once inside, the passengers tried to understand who the unknown men were. It seemed that they were terrorists. Little children began to cry. They did not have food and water, which were necessary in such critical situations. No one understood where they were and what fate awaited them. No one called for help, and people simply prayed. Will all people die and no one can save them? Meanwhile, the woman tried to save Dongsheng, who was her savior. It tried to tear the monster off its face, but everything was in vain. Suddenly, she saw her own shoes and decided to use them. This was the last chance to save it, so she hit with all the strength she had. Suddenly, she succeeded. The worm began to let go of the main character and unhooked itself from his face. She could not believe that she was able to drive it away, and she realized that the worm, in fact, was also afraid of pain. It became very quiet and peaceful, and it seemed that the monster had finally left her. Dongsheng was alive and started coughing. Blood was coming out of his mouth, and he was bleeding heavily. He was going to die soon, so she tried to help him, but first, she had to find a safe place. She started hitting him in the face and trying to wake him up. And finally, he came to his senses and asked her to stop because they were hitting him too hard. One thanked him for saving her because she had been conscious the whole time and saw how much he had risked for her. Suddenly, he started vomiting. His eyes filled with tears because he didn't believe he would survive. Dongsheng told about the man who was lying next to him because he was dangerous. However, the girl took care of it and now she thought he was dead. But when he tried to grab her again, she got really scared and hit him again. Now, she needed to find a place so she could examine and treat his wounds. Dongsheng's ribs were broken, so he couldn't move on his own. In addition, his head hurt and he couldn't stay conscious for long. Dongsheng couldn't just leave without finding his best friend, who they had boarded the plane with. He just couldn't leave him and hadn't seen him since the bandits hijacked the plane. They searched the dead man's belongings, but they didn't find anything that could have belonged to his friend. But to be sure, he wanted to check all the things he found again. But when he bent down, he saw something strange on the ground. The girl thought he was a pervert, but in fact it wasn't so. It was much, much more beautiful. The tracks left by the wheels of cars. It seemed that they were rescuers, but he quickly realized that it wasn't so. Because on the ground he also found cigarettes and a lot of metal. But the girl tried to calm him down and convinced him that his friend was alive. Her name was Ouyang Shaolin, and she helped him get up and go in search of a safe place. The people sitting behind the bars tried to understand why they were now being held captive here and what fate awaited them. In addition, it was interesting who the bandits were who were sitting next to them, and for that they needed an entire plane. The guy decided to ask them why the bandits did not let them go, and they all ended up in a trap. After all, he had promised that all the passengers would be safe. However, the bandit looked at him coldly and forced him to leave. His words scared the guy so much that he did not dare to talk to them anymore. The man simply left because in any case, they would all simply die. He managed to understand that the bandits and the military were not from the same group. This meant that all of them could now be trapped, and even the robbers did not know how to get out. Therefore, it was necessary to find a way to save themselves and stay alive. However, the passengers had no options and clues. It seemed like the end. Among the passengers were rich people who were going to buy themselves out of death and save themselves. At such moments, it was impossible to panic, so they went through absolutely all the options. But they did not know how much the enemies could ask for and whether they would be able to get the entire amount. In addition, the boss's wife could hardly give such a large sum for their ransom, so the chances were very small. The other also had rich friends who could give him money, but it was also very risky. The girls started crying because they thought they would never be able to go back to school and would die. The young children were convinced that everything was not really happening. The parents tried to convince them that it was a television program in which they were all the main characters. And all the cars and houses were just decorations, so everything would end soon. The girl could not cry because she had the role of a prisoner in her head, and so she could give herself away. The girl believed it and calmed down. She wanted to get a good reward for her wonderful work and acting. The old scientist who was watching what was happening sighed heavily. At that moment, he thought about Dongsheng and didn't know if he would ever be able to see him again. Meanwhile, Dongsheng's head hurt so much that he almost lost consciousness and it seemed like it would just fall off. He was tormented by disturbing thoughts and he tried to stop and not think. He had visions, but the boy saw everything blurry and could not explain what was happening to him. Dongsheng felt pressure and knew that the threat was very close. Suddenly, the ground under his feet began to tremble. It seemed like an earthquake or something gigantic was approaching. Dongsheng started to cry. He felt someone's presence and knew, soon, he would be here. And at that moment, a giant monster that resembled a worm wriggled. It stopped right in front of them and seemed to be about to crush the people with its own foot. They bent down to the ground and hoped that the danger would pass and the monster would simply not notice them. And when the danger passed, they could finally get up. But Dongsheng was so tired that he fell asleep immediately when he was on the ground. The girl tried to wake him up, but the boy did not react. He saw footage from his childhood. He managed to see his own parents, whom he missed very much, but they were angry with him. There, he saw his friend and remembered that he had to save him. This was what kept him from simply dying and forced him to continue living. So he woke up. The boy was very scared and couldn't understand whether he was still sleeping or had already woken up. He felt very sick. The bleeding wouldn't stop, and he also had a high fever. Ouyang Shaolin tried to understand what he was saying. But because of the fever, he started hallucinating. So she didn't understand anything at all. Ouyang Shaolin wanted him to fall asleep, but he was very cold. He needed to treat his wound, but they didn't have any medicine. The girl tried to cover him so that he could warm up. She also lay down next to him to warm the boy with her own body heat, and he was finally able to fall asleep. Meanwhile, a new car arrived at the camp with the prisoners. It was the boss, who was supposed to return and decide what to do with all those who had surrendered. The other bandits were very happy when they saw him because it meant that now they could receive their reward. Finally, they would not have to wait any longer and would be able to get their money. The boss was a real fat man, surrounded by beautiful girls who accompanied him and were constantly next to him. He sold the bodies of dead accounts and was able to get a very good amount for them on the market. He also managed to find new weapons that were very effective in the fight against mutants and other people. It was a new large-caliber gun on the black market. Now he wanted to install a new weapon on his own car, and did not tell the technician to do it as soon as possible so that they could go on new tasks. Finally, the bandits dared to tell about the new prisoners who were already waiting for him. To confirm his words, the bandits showed their personal belongings, among which were watches, bags, and necklaces. The boss praised them for their excellent work, but knew that people were not needed on the market right now and it would be very difficult to sell them. In addition, some of the passengers had cards with interesting numbers, which interested the boss very much. He explained that they saw a bright light that was formed after the plane exploded, but no one could believe that the plane was able to reach their territory and fly there for so long. The origin of the people was very strange, so the chief wanted to look at them and ordered to bring everyone to him. His order began to be carried out and armed men entered the cell. Passengers with special numbers were led personally so that they would not go anywhere and you would not try to escape. The passengers could not understand that you did not want, because they were obedient citizens and had never broken the law. The director, who had money, tried to bribe the bandits, but the chief did not even want to listen to him. He was not going to receive a ransom for him because he did not need the money. His people knew that it was impossible to earn money from selling people, so they offered to leave them for entertainment. When on the other hand, a lot of food and resources were needed to maintain them, so it was easier to just kill them. First of all, they decided to get rid of the old people who could not work. And the first was the director, whom they were going to kill, despite all his power and money. Everything was over. The bandits killed him in cold blood. His dead body was lying on the ground. Now it was the turn of other people to die, and the bandits had already chosen new victims for themselves. They were to be Professor Hill, along with the woman he was sitting next to on the plane. The man was going to hit him with a butt, but suddenly he was stopped. The chief of the bandits intervened in the fight, who wanted to say something and try to negotiate with him. But they didn't even want to shake him down and immediately hit him in the face. However, the boss stopped him. He wanted to listen to what the man wanted and what proposal he had. Therefore, he was allowed to speak. The man wanted to join them, but for this, he needed to defeat two thugs. In the confrontation, they were allowed to use weapons. Despite the danger and inequality, he decided to try because he simply had nothing to lose. The bandits opened fire and tried to kill him. But he, together with his partner, managed to dodge the attack and stay alive. Now, he tried to get closer in order to attack them. And now when he found the stone and everything was ready, he began to attack. With an accurate hit to the head, he managed to knock out one of them. The other was amazed at such agility and did not expect that they would be able to resist and survive. He did not notice at all how the other managed to get up from behind and strike. The bandit hit him right in the head, from which he lost consciousness and fell to the ground. The chief finished him off to make sure that he would definitely not get up again and open fire. It was all over, and they emerged victorious in such an unequal confrontation. The man congratulated them on their victory, but was about to kill. However, the chief stopped him again. The guys were able to interest him and prove that they were worthy opponents. But now were different times, and the chief did not know what would be the use of people who lived a century ago. No one could understand what he meant and where they actually ended up. The woman explained that now, in fact, was the year 2117, and they were able to get into their castle. She wanted to know their names and asked how life was a century ago. The man had no name. His name was simply Peeper, while his partner was called Eagle. He did not care where he was now because in any case, he considered himself much stronger than the other bandits. In addition, he offered them his own help and was going to teach everyone military affairs. The bandit could not believe what he heard and was about to shoot him again, but the leader stopped him again. They seemed very useful to him, so he invited them to join his team and become part of the clan. The girls were called Agatha and Selena, and they were happy to see men in their new team. They were warned about very strict rules that could not be broken, otherwise they would be punished. At Peeper's request, they decided to leave the old professor alive, and you were going to kill the old woman. When she was also difficult and before they could shoot her, she stopped the bandits. She was going to show what she was really capable of. And immediately, she started dancing, taking a red handkerchief from her pocket. No one could understand what was happening and what the woman really wanted to do with her dance. However, she did not even think of stopping and was going to show everything she was capable of. She had nothing to lose, so she danced as if it were the last time. In the end, the leader stopped her because he was fed up. He could not understand what her dance meant, but she offered to teach him these moves. They were going to search her again and check if she had any weapons and other dangerous things. However, Selena really liked it. She would like to get used to it like that because it looked very sexy and attractive. The others did not agree with him. No one wanted to feed so many people. However, the boss thought differently. He considered people good food for themselves. For their work and diligence, he allowed each of them to choose a person to eat. After a while, the bandits began to choose a victim for themselves. These people seemed very attractive and tasty to them, not at all like the people from the past. The boss started moving in their direction and ordered all the men to move in the other direction, leaving the children and women alone. He liked that many people were afraid of him, and from this, he felt much better. He noticed a girl whose eyes he really liked. Therefore, he was going to choose her. The man was going to show her something that the Raven had never seen before. After he made his choice, the others began to tie her up and drag her by force. She tried to break free and asked to talk to her own child. The woman tried to calm the child down and said that it was just a game. In fact, everything would be fine with her and she would return soon. The bandits did not let her say anything and began to take her away by force. The child tried to break free and leave with her, but the old woman stopped her and tried to calm her down. She hugged the girl to her and started hugging her. Others could also choose a victim for themselves because the chief allowed them to do so. And when they went towards the crowd and were about to choose women for themselves, the old professor stopped them. He could not understand how they could afford to kill innocent people. Peeper tried to stop him, to silence him, because he understood that the old man would simply be killed. But Hill spent his whole life working for the benefit of civilization, and now could not accept the fact that ordinary people were being killed so brutally. He knew that his death would not change anything at all, but he decided to try to change at least something to save at least one life. But Peeper did not let him finish. He simply hit him on the head and knocked him out. He tried to save him again, and do everything possible so that the bandits would not simply kill him. Also, when he asked the others not to touch him and promised to make sure that the professor did not say anything unnecessary. If people behaved well, they would be able to stay alive. Otherwise, they were threatened with death. However, they were pleased that they managed to find such clean and beautiful people, so they were very valuable prisoners. Now it was the captain's turn to choose a victim for himself. A woman stood up for her, who had been with her husband all the time and was very afraid. He could not believe that this had happened to him and was going to do anything to let her go and not be touched. The man pointed to other attractive girls and tried to convince the bandit to choose them instead of his wife. But no one listened to him, and he was only severely beaten in the face. The offended and angry guy was going to take revenge and wanted to try to kill his offender. And when he grabbed a stone and tried to hit the bandit did not hesitate. He killed him with a cold-blooded shot to the head. This was to be a lesson to all those people who would try to do something like that. Now he was going to enjoy his new joke. People understood that the girl could have stayed alive, but they had no chance in the fight against the bandits. Husan was also going to choose a new victim for himself, but soon, the group had to be driven back into the cage. The guys understood that they had no chance, so they didn't need to try to resist. They had to behave very carefully and not arouse any suspicion so as not to anger the enemy. But something that no one expected happened. Husan chose a guy for himself. Everyone was scared because of what happened. The guy couldn't believe that everything was really happening. But when the bandit presented him with a gun to his throat, he realized that he couldn't be joked with. Now he simply had no other choice because if he didn't follow his order, he would simply die. It was very difficult for the others to let him go, but they did not interfere so as not to risk their own lives. Meanwhile, it began to dawn. Dongsheng began to wake up and realized that he was lucky to stay alive. Nevertheless, the girl managed to save him again and not let him freeze in the cold night. And he saw her next to him, but she was still sleeping. When she woke up, he realized that she had been trying to warm him all night. Now he felt much better, and the fever had gone. In addition, he noticed that he calmly got to his feet and his wound did not hurt at all. On the contrary, during the night, her hair had almost completely healed and now he did not feel anything at all. His wounds and illness disappeared. But could it be related to the monster that appeared last night and attached itself to him? Despite everything that had happened, he was not going to relax because he wanted to find his friend Tian Xiao. There were still traces of cars on the ground, so they were going to move in their direction. She tried to help him and wanted to take the heavy bags, but he wouldn't let her do it. After a while, they saw a high mountain in front of them, near which was a building that looked like a military base. Suddenly, she noticed how the boy was constantly hitting his head. This was how he tried to get rid of the feeling that they were constantly being chased by monsters. The girl wanted to go to the military base as soon as possible because she thought that they would be able to help him there. But the hero was in no hurry because he had a very bad feeling about that place. Therefore, in order to check everything, he made her wait and he himself went to explore. They knew absolutely nothing about this area, so they had to be careful, because this was the only way to survive and save their lives. The girl was worried about him, but he again convinced her that everything was fine with his body. And soon, he would be able to return to her and tell her about everything he had found out. He began to get closer and closer, because he was trying to find out what kind of building it was. It looked very scary and abandoned, as if there were no people there at all. In addition, he felt much better than before being injured, and it was very strange. When he approached the building, he noticed that it looked like a bandit league because there were so many strange things there. And if Tian Xiao could really be here, then he hoped that everything was okay with them. Now he watched the huge number of bandits guarding the territory. He managed to find out that the bandits had mountaineers who were sitting in a prison cell and could dispose of them as they pleased. He understood that the prisoners were constantly changed and each of them was taken for one night. Now Dongsheng tried to follow the man who was heading to the prison cell. He did not take his eyes off him, but remained in a safe place and made sure that no one noticed him. Now he watched as the bandit entered a room for a prisoner. The guard took prisoners from different parts of the base and wanted to replace them with fresh people. This was the commander's order, and he was going to replace one man with another from the group of prisoners. The guards almost fought for the right to spend the night with the prisoners, but they did everything in turn. When the guard turned away, the main character began to go downstairs and tried to save the prisoner. He started knocking on his door, hoping that the guard would open it. And at that moment, he struck hard and suddenly. Dongsheng was able to knock out the man without making any noise or attracting attention. Now, he needed to find people and he tried to find the cell they were sitting in. After carefully examining the entire room, he managed to find his own friends. Among them was Tian Xiao, who had not expected to see him in this place at all. The hero promised to save them and try to get them out of the camp. But first, he needed to find the key, so he didn't notice that there was another bandit behind him. It was Peeper, who was constantly watching him. In fact, he was surprised that he managed to survive and get to the bandit camp. The guy understood that he had to run away because the man was on the same side with the bandits and was just about to kill him. Dongsheng couldn't believe that after everything that had happened, he dared to join the bandits. After all, they had killed his partner, but even that didn't stop him. Dongsheng wasn't going to run away. On the contrary, he wanted to fight and try to win. He wanted to hit him, but Peeper very easily coped with it and was able to block the attack. But the hero didn't stop and tried to hit him again. And this time, he managed to escape and even catch him by the arm. But the guy was much stronger than he thought at first. He could become a serious opponent for him, so he had to be careful. Peeper underestimated him from the very beginning, but in any case considered him a novice and a weakling. Dongsheng understood that he could not take risks because the survival of others depended on him. During the fight with him, the opponent realized that he was very fast and strong. But this did not help him at all in a duel with him because he was not a boxer and did not know how to fight. But the man did not strike a single blow. He wanted to make a deal with him. Peeper wanted the guy to start working for him. However, he could not let go of any of his friends because he had no right to do so. The man was convinced that very soon he would be able to rule the whole world and wanted the boy to join him. And this time he refused again and tried to strike again. Now the man could not delay any longer. He decided to teach him a lesson. Therefore, he hit him with all his strength right in the face. In fact, he did not want to hit him and regretted that the boy did not join him because they were the ones who could change fate. He simply had no other choice, so he threw him into prison with the other prisoners. The professor and Tian Xiao tried to help him. You would like to bring him to his senses. Many people lost their hope for survival, which appeared with the appearance of the main character. After all, now there was no one to save them, and the last hope for salvation disappeared. The suspicious old man laughed at Tian Xiao because of what they had done to him. Other people who had also survived the night with the bandits tried to stand up for him. He allowed himself to talk too much, so it was offensive. The girls got angry and called him a nasty bastard. One of them could not stand it and hit him in the face. And then, he got up and hit her back with all his strength. No one could calm him down because he was rich and did not respect others. 6. However, everything changed when Dongsheng intervened. He couldn't stand it and decided to stand up for the girl, so he hit him in the face with all his strength. Tian Xiao was very surprised because the guy had never fought, and now he had become so strong that he knocked him out with one punch. He told the people about the situation outside. In fact, they were in a completely different era and lived in their own time. They all gathered to come up with a new escape plan. The hero told how the fortifications were built and that his girlfriend was waiting for him outside. The new plan looked good and the others wanted to start preparing for the escape as soon as possible. But it wasn't that simple because they didn't have any information about the number of enemies. However, if they stayed, they would only hasten their death, because every minute it became even more dangerous. Dongsheng suggested using their car, but the professor didn't agree with his idea because it was too risky. On the other hand, they couldn't wait. Besides, they had information about the area and the direction in which they needed to move. Dongsheng approached the beaten man. He allowed him to go with them, but he had to behave normally and do what he was told. After a while, he heard the steps of the guard approaching their cage. He brought food for the people, so he approached the cell quite close. It was a potato that he had just poured out on the floor for people to see. But suddenly, the guard noticed people sitting in the corner of the cell and whispering. Suddenly, Tian Xiao came out to meet him, who said that there was a corpse inside. Hill said that he had no pulse, so the tube had to be taken away and thrown away somewhere. Very soon, he would start to decompose and smell unpleasant, so he had to be taken away as soon as possible. He was skeptical of their words, but decided to check the corpse with his own eyes. And he ordered the people to bring the dead body to him so that he could examine everything with his own eyes. If he was deceived, then the bandit promised to shoot each of them. The bandit noticed a serious wound on his ribs, but could not determine whose heart was beating. He could not reach his heart, so he ordered to pull him closer to him. The male was a moment. One of the prisoners tried to distract him and shouted loudly. And when the bandit was distracted, the guy took advantage of this and dealt a strong blow directly to the neck. It worked. Now they had weapons and keys to the cell, so they freed themselves very quickly. There was a lot of security in the center. Most of the cars were parked at the gates, so they had to be stolen. The cars had to be started. For this, the wires could be closed. When everything was carefully planned, they tried to get to one of the cars. In order to get inside, you had to try to open the door, but do it very quietly. When everything was ready, you had to gather other people and quietly take them outside in order to put them on the car body. Dongsheng understood that at that moment everything depended only on him, so you had to be very careful. But as soon as he started running, he noticed that the car's handicaps were on and decided to turn back to try to fix everything. The man who was sitting behind the wheel accidentally turned them on, and now they risked dying. Their plan failed when the bandits noticed them and were going to kill them right there. Dongsheng managed to hide and stay alive, but now they had problems and the plan was under threat. The guy tried to hide, but he saw how his friends were in danger because at any moment they could be shot. And now he thought that this was the end. He would not be able to escape anymore. Peeper was able to find him again, but he had to wait for the boss before deciding what to do with them. Before his appearance, the people were very brutally beaten and taken to the central square on the territory of the base. They were ready at any moment to shoot the men who tried to escape. The director approached each of them and began to threaten. The frightened and destitute people convinced that this would not happen again and promised not to run away again. But the bandits could not be persuaded, so the truck driver was the first to die. After that, the bandits opened fire and began to kill people who could not even defend themselves. The main character was mortally wounded. His body was riddled with bullets. Yang Shaolin continued to wait and hoped that he would soon be able to return to her. She did not lose hope and faith that he was alive. Other people witnessed the brutal massacre, however, they could not change anything. The chief ordered to throw out their bodies so that they would not start to rot and create a stench. But the bandits understood that someone was missing from the crowd of dads. There was no man with glasses, so most likely he managed to escape. The chief was very angry when he found out that one of the prisoners managed to escape. Therefore, he promised to punish everyone if the escapee was not found. A huge core was found in the monsters that were killed the day before, which could be sold for a large sum on the black market. With this money, you could buy a couple of new cars and weapons for them. Now, the bandits would definitely be able to get rich and hoped that soon there would be no equal. But they could not contact the buyers directly, because there were rules. If they are broken, the other clones on the threshold will start to strike. The bodies of the men were lying in the dump, but despite the severe injuries, the main character remained alive and was able to get up. He felt a strange power in his body and that he was not an ordinary person like before. He heard a strange voice that told him to kill all the people because now he was a carrier. The guy managed to recover. His wounds were healing, so he was able to survive. He managed to feel that the monster was very close and was about to strike. The monster was angry and tried to find new victims for himself. Meanwhile, the events again moved to the bandit camp. For several days in a row, they had been feeding people only potatoes. So today, they were going to cook it so that they could finally eat normally. The guard completely lost his vigilance and did not notice how the main character approached him. Dongsheng managed to remain unnoticed and made his way inside the camp where the other people remained. And when the guard saw him, he could not believe his own eyes. He was very scared because he had seen with his own eyes how the guy died. And now that he was just standing in front of him, whole and unharmed, the hero asked a question about the monsters that existed in this world. He wanted to know if people could win if a war broke out between monsters and them, and if they had ever killed a really great mutant. However, the guard did not believe his words because he had never seen monsters larger than 100 meters. And even if Dongsheng showed him this mutant, the man still would not believe it. The guy knew that a mutant raid on their camp was about to happen soon, so the bandits needed to prepare well for it. Dongsheng was convinced that no one would be able to stay alive during the next attack and their entire town would be destroyed. He said this only to save his comrades. He had to hurry because there was very little time left. But how did he manage to find out about the next attack? The guy explained that he had been attacked by mutants, after which he began to feel an incredible power in his body that could bring him back to life. If the guard lets his comrades go, he will help him escape. You will save your own life. Suddenly, they heard a strange voice that resembled laughter. It was the same rich man who, taking advantage of the moment, was able to escape and now was mocking them. The boss had already found out about the fugitive because the guards reported that they had spotted him. Soon, they were to go in search of him and try to catch him at any cost. The bandits began to climb high up the mountain to get to him. He was already imagining how he would return to the normal world and his usual life. And finally, I would be able to forget about this terrible dream. This was his world, with money, fame, and wealth. He did not want to die because he had a lot of plans and unfulfilled tasks. The man was convinced that his fate was waiting for him now, when he could get out of this hell. However, he did not even notice how behind him was a terrible mutant who could easily kill him and destroy all his plans. Suddenly, his dead body began to fall to the ground. But what happened? The guard still did not understand anything. But very quickly, the bandit saw the monster, which was the cause of his death. The main character again felt that his head was about to burst. He knew that the mutants were very close, so it was necessary to open the cage with people as soon as possible. They had never seen such a huge mutant before. The chief ordered all weapons to be put on high alert and prepared for defense. Now the guard realized that the boy was telling the truth, and mutants really existed. Therefore, he decided to lead the boys to their friends and open the cage. The other bandits were preparing fortifications and were going to repel the mutant attack. When the monster began to approach them, they opened fire, trying to stop him. But their weapons were not very effective and it did not bring any results. However, they did not stop the fire and hoped that at least it could help. Even the best meds that they had could not cope with the monster. The fire was very dense, but this did not stop the mutant, and he continued to crush everything in his path. The ammunition was running out very quickly, but people did not have time to replace them. The mutant was very close, and now all of them were in mortal danger. People tried to escape, because they saw that with every minute the mutants were becoming more and more numerous. It seemed that among the mutants there were those who could destroy the whole world and lead humanity to the apocalypse. Peeper tried to escape, but the boss stopped him. The man didn't even intend to continue fighting, because he knew that there was no point in it, and they would all die. Therefore, the boss tried to kill him for desertion. He managed to dodge the first blow. However, he didn't even think about surrendering, and the fact that the enemy was much larger didn't matter to him. Gathering his strength, Peeper rushed straight at him and was going to attack the man. However, the fat man was not confused and was ready for anything. Peeper was faster, so he tried to get as close as possible. And again, he failed to hit him in the face. Realizing that he could not win alone, Eagle came to the rescue. They tried to strangle each other while the girls watched what was happening. Meanwhile, the main character tried to get all the people out. Soon, the camp would be completely destroyed, and there was a complete hell around, so everyone needed to escape as quickly as possible. The guard understood that they needed to escape, so he was going to lead them to the garage, where it was safe. He understood that the mutant had almost managed to capture the camp, so they needed to move faster. It was very dangerous around, and they risked dying before they even reached it. Huge blocks of stones flew over their heads and bullets whistled. There was a truck inside, so they had a chance to survive and escape. Suddenly, a mutant appeared right above Tian Xiao and almost killed him. They didn't have time to get to the garage, which was being discussed, and Dongsheng was already inside. It seemed that this was the end, so all the people began to cry because they had lost hope of survival. Now, they had no plan, and they didn't know how to save themselves. They had to come up with a way out of the difficult situation. And, looking around, Tian Xiao realized that they needed to buy a new car. They needed to unite their efforts and think only about survival, so they all went in search. But the girl who moved first was killed by a terrible mutant. Now, the terrible monsters were inside their territory, and people had to dodge their attacks. Tian Xiao almost died and ended up on the ground. But, despite this, he did not give up trying to dig up Dongsheng and try to save him. The professor tried to stop him because there was no point in it. The old man saw the threat approaching, and at the last moment, they would have time to push him and save his life. At that moment, they saw a huge truck that drove out of the middle of the garage. When the door opened, they saw the main character again, who ordered everyone to go inside and prepare to escape. But there were many people left in the city for whom they had to return. They tried to escape from the monsters that were chasing them. The girls were already preparing to die, when suddenly, at the last moment, the guy was able to save them again and stop the mutant. Now he was going to escape with them again, and help them climb inside the car where they could feel safe. But it was too early to relax because the giant monster began to attack them and almost killed one of the girls. The girl fell to the ground. She was seriously injured and could not get up. Suddenly, the monster struck and pierced her right in the stomach. Now, for her, everything was over, and she would not be able to recover from such a serious injury. They opened fire on the monster, trying to drive it away from the people and give them the opportunity to escape. But the bullets ran out very quickly and he could not continue firing. Bogdan was going to attack him directly, but the guy was not afraid. He was ready to meet his death with dignity and was not afraid of it at all. They couldn't wait too long, so the girl had to get in the car and leave as soon as possible. The main character smelled blood and his head started to hurt again. He couldn't just wait any longer, so he left the car and rushed to his girlfriend's body. The guy couldn't stop standing in front of the fresh blood that was on her body. In addition, he constantly heard the voice that was in his head and tried to resist this desire. Dongsheng was able to stand the temptation and didn't bite her, but simply threw her into the car so that other people could save her. He understood that he had a special connection with mutants, so he tried to control it and resist the threat. Therefore, the guy stopped in front of him, not giving him the opportunity to attack the car and kill other people. For some time, he managed to stop the mutant, but the ammunition ran out, so he had to retreat and jump into the truck. Now they began to run away and only hoped that the mutant would not be pursued. Pieper also managed to find cars. Just now, he was trying to escape from dangerous territory. But now, he was threatened by mutants at the gate and other guards who saw that he did not obey the main one. Together with him were girls who suggested that he go with them, because there was no more chance of survival. The boss died in the battle with the mutants, so there was no one left to save. Their base was destroyed, and those who wanted to survive had to flee right now. The only way to do this was to go right now with them and try to escape as far as possible. Therefore, the bandits announced an urgent gathering at the city gates, and they tried to take the most valuable things with them: weapons, medicine, water, and ammunition. Meanwhile, the main character and his team were moving towards the main gate and trying to leave the dangerous area. The bandit who was sitting next to him could not understand what he was trying to do, because he almost died. Suddenly, they noticed that the gate was already open so they could safely get out of the area. This meant that they were able to get out and they had a chance to survive. A huge explosion rang out right behind them, and now, there was no doubt that the base was completely destroyed and no one managed to stay alive. But before running away, Dongsheng ordered to go to the mountain because his girlfriend was waiting for him there. There was a special room in the car with clothes and weapons so he could pick up everything he needed. The guy chose for himself what he liked the most, and now that he was going to meet his friends, they were all inside where it was safe. People were scared and injured, so they helped each other. The girl who suffered the most from the mutant attack did not believe that she would be able to stay alive. She started bleeding heavily and now her life was in danger. Her parents said that in any situation it was necessary to remain strong, but now she could not do anything. Meanwhile, the car stopped near the same mountain where Ouyang Shaolin was waiting for the main character. He tried to shout to her, but everything was in vain. Dongsheng thought that she could hide from him, so he would try to get to the top to find her. But when he managed to get higher, he only saw the body of the mutant who was in the same place. The guy could not believe that she was now dead and tried to shout to her. The mutant started to catch up with him, so the driver tried to escape. Dongsheng could not believe that the driver could leave him here to die because he saved their lives. But, unexpectedly for him, the car turned around and rammed the mutant. He did not brake, and until Monster got up and started chasing them, they tried to escape. After a few days, they managed to break away for a long distance, but he did not feel safe. Deep inside, he felt anger for not being able to find her and help her escape. The guy could not stop thinking about it and dreaming of meeting her at least once in his life. He was sure that he could change everything, but in the end, it turned out that his strength was not enough. His father said that life was much crueler and that you could only understand it when you yourself find yourself in such a situation. The guys warned that his impulsiveness could only harm and make things worse for those around him. Meanwhile, the bandits also managed to get out of the camp and find a new place for themselves. They managed to set up a small camp in which they were going to wait for a few days. They had to look for a better place because it was very dangerous there, because they were in an open area. They wanted to try to go to the black market to seek refuge there and try to find allies. After all, it was the nearest safe place, where there were definitely no mutants. Pieper understood that he really liked this world, because there were no rules here and everyone had to follow the single law of survival. Now, they were trying to find out who would become the new leader of their group. In addition, they had a new prisoner who was to become their personal slave. And, as it turned out, it was Oi Yang Sha-lin, who herself came to them to try to find the main character. Luther was to become the new boss and he was to have the girl. Pieper didn't want to put up with it, so he was going to teach the impudent man a lesson. He challenged him and was going to fight him one-on-one. But, instead, there were many armed men behind him. Pieper offered to follow him, because it was thanks to him that they were all alive now. The people needed a brave leader, so he challenged him again to check who was really stronger. But it was not an easy battle. To demonstrate his strength, it was a battle to the death, the winner of which got everything. But Luther didn't want to fight him, and after that, everyone started accusing him of cowardice, because he couldn't even accept the challenge like a real man. These words really angered him, so when he took the weapon and was going to end it, but Pieper beat him to the punch before he could make a shot. And then, another punch, and the bandit leader was on the ground, helpless and defenseless. Meanwhile, the main characters group also set up camp and stopped for one of the mountains. Unfortunately, the girl could not be saved, so they buried her and made a small grave. She could not be brought back, so they just had to let her go. This was her best friend, and she could not even believe that such a misfortune could happen to her. There was food in the car, so for the first time in a few days, they were going to have a proper meal. Dongsheng wondered if the monsters were spread all over the world or just in this area. Besides, the bandits had never encountered such large mutants before that could destroy their fortifications so easily. There was a city on the mainland where all the people gathered to survive. The man said that his gang were thugs and bandits who robbed ordinary people. But he didn't know what kind of people we really were in that city and how they would treat them. The only thing that was known was that there was a very strict guard there who kept order. Each city had its own special rules, but they definitely didn't kill ordinary people there unless they were taken prisoner. Therefore, the professor didn't want to delay any longer and was going to go in search of the same city. However, they didn't have the necessary supplies to successfully get there. First, they had to find a sufficient amount of gasoline, water, food, and other supplies. Also, they had to find special bullets that could easily pierce the skin of mutants and even the armor of cars. They could be made from mutant nuclei, which were very valuable on the black market, and for this, you could do quite well. Suddenly, they heard a strange voice not far from them. The man thought that it was mutants who had managed to catch up with them again. But the main character knew that it was Tian Xiao who was in trouble again. Therefore, without delay, he rushed to his aid. The boy was lying on the ground and could not move from fear. On the ground lay a box, in which was a very strange thing which resembled an egg. However, it seemed that it was safe, and in order to make sure of this, they called a bandit. The man was shocked when he saw the egg in front of him. It seemed that he was very happy and started screaming with joy. Dongsheng could not stand it and hit him, because it was too much. The man understood that it was a core, and he could not even think that it could remain right here, in the car. He told the people that it was a real treasure and a very valuable thing in their time. It was the core of a monster, the most valuable thing that could make a lot of my all. The place they needed to go to was called the City of the East. This city was truly legendary because it stood on top of the snowy mountains. No monster could reach it, and there was no radiation there. The city was very well guarded, and its defenders could repel any attack, so they were called the Guardians of Human Civilization. When people heard about this place, they realized that this was their chance for salvation. There was no need to be afraid anymore, and the hardest thing was just getting there. But the man didn't finish speaking. It was very difficult to get there, and you could easily die. They couldn't believe that hope was so illusory in reality. Everything was not so simple. In fact, no one knew the exact location of the city. Also, there was a threat of meeting other, much more terrible enemies there than mutants. The core that they had could be exchanged for very valuable things, ammunition and supplies. This city was the greatest of all that he knew. It was a real paradise there, and they were the ones who traded goods all over the earth. Also, he told about the tunnel that could be used to get into the city. But in reality, everything was not so simple. Ordinary people like them could not easily get inside because only officers and military personnel were allowed to enter. Meanwhile, Pieper was to become the new boss. And now he was going to show everyone what it meant to be free and rich.